Now, crime continues to be a major concern. Cyber experts are warning the public to be extra cautious while online. Some people have been victims of online scams and have lost millions of rand. To discuss this, we're joined, to protect ourselves from cybercrime, we are joined by Craig Pedersen from the TFG Forensics. Thank you very much, Mr. Pedersen, for your time here, and welcome to All Angles. Now, firstly, how big is the problem in South Africa really? What is our reality? What's going to happen to us in a few years' time if we don't do anything about it?
Well, the tragic reality about cybercrime in South Africa at the moment is that it's definitely on an upward trend. We're starting to see more and more different types of cybercrimes, ranging from normal banking scams to invoice interception scams, and the amounts are just growing and growing and growing all the time, and the level of incidences are growing in parallel to that. It's just become too easy to commit cybercrime in Africa, and specifically in South Africa.
So how do we look then compared to other African countries and other countries around the world? Is it that bad? Are we looking that bleak?
I think what the part of the challenge with that is that we're not really able to extrapolate accurate figures out of the police services in terms of cybercrimes being categorized on their own. So it's really difficult to tell exactly what that quantitative measure is. But from a reporting perspective and the rand values that we're seeing, it is definitely on the increase. Whereas 2 years ago, the average rand value of a cybercrime was probably a couple of 100,000 rand. It's now stretching into millions quite comfortably, and we're seeing interception of people's cryptocurrency accounts, for example, has really risen in the last 2 years, where people are downloading applications that they think are the legitimate application to manage their cryptos, and they're actually downloading clone versions, and the cryptos being siphoned off and redirected to other people. So it's definitely something that is increasing. I would say we're probably increasing slightly more than the rest of Africa at this point in time.
So what is it that we're doing wrong then in South Africa to make it so easy for these cyber criminals to intercept us like this? Is it crime intelligence? Is it government? Is it a lack of, implementation of policy by our politicians?
I think a lot of it has got to do with a lack of public education in terms of awareness of the basics of phishing scams, and not to click on links that are not expected or look even slightly dodgy, if you will. There's also a simplicity to our banking system where these cyber criminals seem to have ready access to bank accounts to receive those funds as proxies and then move those funds off elsewhere. Now, there are institutions like SABIC that are working quite aggressively to try and reduce that and to manage that dynamic, but it's going to take time. At the same time, we've seen the implementation of the Cybercrimes Act, but it's not yet fully running and implemented. It's going to take a while before the Cybercrimes Act is really in force and there to help us with prosecuting cyber criminals as we do catch them. So that is part of the challenge at the moment, is the prosecutorial side.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that, Mr. Pedersen, in terms of the fact that you're saying that statistics show that the trend is growing fast in South Africa. How do the arrests and prosecutions look compared to how fast the industry, if I can call it that, is growing?
If I had to be honest, I'd probably say it's regressive. We're just not getting where we need to be with prosecutions. Hopefully, in the next year or two, we'll start to see a designated cybercrime court evolve that's got prosecutors that are properly trained to prosecute these offences and to uphold the Cybercrime Act itself. To prosecute them properly requires quite a good foundational knowledge in different IT concepts and those of digital forensics, and it's going to take time for us to get there. Where the meeting point is between the rise in incidences and the ability to prosecute successfully, I couldn't quite say. I'm optimistic that in the next 3 years we're going to see significant movement in that space, and I'm hopeful that we're going to start to see the incidences and the prosecution rates starting to come together and meet.
I'm just worried because, I was speaking to our other guest a little earlier on this show, where I reminded him of how the Department of Justice had also, experienced a cyber crime when, somebody was able to hack into their system. Now, that is a government, it's a national government department that is supposed to look after the lives of many South Africans. It's got many of our personal information, etc. There was also another one a few weeks ago on TransUnion, I think it's called, the company Transnet. It's TransUnion. It's that company that is supposed to be looking after our private information so that nobody is able to steal our identities and open accounts in our names, etc. That also experienced a hack. So I'm worried about the trajectory and how it looks in a few years, and how a lot of people, it'll be like a mass crime soon.
You're right on the mark there. The significant data breaches in South Africa over the last year have really aggressively contributed to incidences of fake accounts being opened up in people's names, identity theft, fraudulent claims being lodged with insurance companies, people being scammed over the telephone because they assume they are talking to somebody from the bank because that person's armed with the right information. South Africa really needs to get serious about data security and data privacy, and we need to take the POPI compliance to heart. We really do need to protect the information that is out there, and I don't think that we're really doing that properly at the moment. And companies need to be very well aware of the risk that comes with that information leaking out and how it's used by cyber criminals to access people's banking even. We've got to really up our game when it comes to the protection of data and to notifying people correctly when the data has been breached and what data has been breached and what the potential consequences of that are. In terms of the ransomware attacks against state institutions, well, ransomware is going to affect anybody in attack anyway. If there's a vulnerability, then you run the risk of ransomware. It is disturbing that state institutions are still at risk for this because the vulnerability of that data, I mean, the immense cost to Transnet of the shipping delays that were caused and the transit delays of goods that sat in the harbour because they couldn't move containers, they didn't have what seemed to be a workable plan B in place. The breach of the master's office, it's still unclear what data exactly was taken, if there was any data loss. And we need to get those lines of communication flowing in terms of what exactly has been lost and what is the potential impact to those people whose data has been compromised.
Now, ICASA has some regulations that are out for public opinion, of course, and I think the closing date was actually last week or the week before, where they're trying to implement that all cell phone companies need to use biometrics for a person to get a SIM card. Will that assist us with cybercrime, at least at that level?
If I have to be honest, it's probably not the right reply, but no, I think it's going to be highly ineffective. We've already seen that the RICA Act, for example, is completely ineffective. It hasn't reduced the number of ghost phones that are out there. It hasn't reduced accessibility to criminal elements of burner phones. It hasn't made criminals more identifiable. I don't see that it's worked at all, and in terms of cybercrime at least. And the new biometric requirement, I don't think that's going to help at all, because even if you have the biometrics of the person who's reading the phone, well, that doesn't help you, because they're just going to pass the phone to 3 or 4 other sets of hands before it's eventually used for criminal activity. So it's an interesting thought. I don't think South Africa is ready for something like that. I don't think it's going to have any impact whatsoever, unfortunately.
Well, if I, for instance, get a SIM card via biometrics, maybe they use my fingerprints or my face, etc., it's unique to me, and then I give my phone to a criminal, and then that phone is found maybe pinging at a tower where a crime happened, would they not then be able to bring it back to me? Would that still not help with crime at all?
Oh, yes, of course. Look, for the average citizen, the average person, yes, it does create a bigger digital footprint to work from. The issue is that you can go into so many arbitrary shops anywhere in Cape Town and you can buy a handful of pre-recorded SIM cards for 50 Rand. You can do that pretty much anywhere in the country. You can go to a flea market store and you can buy pre-recorded SIM cards, second-hand cell phones. It's just that disposability and the anonymity once it changes from your hands. If you take your handset with a SIM card, a prepaid SIM card that's recorded to you, and you sell it on Gumtree, for example, how do you know who you sold it to? Do you still have record of that? It's just really not going to help. What it is going to do is it's going to slow down the investigative trail, because it's now more data that has to be subpoenaed, more delays in the subpoena process until you get the answer that the data is not pertinent to the suspect.
Then I don't know what our solution is then. What is our solution?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
I'm saying then when you put it like that, then I have no idea what other solution government can come up with, because we were told, we had an interview here last week with an expert who was saying that it's going to assist, especially with people stealing people's identities to open bank accounts or false clothing accounts. Now that you put it that way, I don't know, what's our solution then according to yourself?
Yeah, a lot of the responsibility also vests in the retail chain in terms of authenticating the person that's opening the account. And there are still good methodologies available for that authentication. I don't think it's going to hurt necessarily to have the biometrics in place, but I do not see it as being a panacea. It's not going to be an overall solution, and I don't see a huge reduction coming out of it. People migrate cell phones, they change numbers, and this happens when they upgrade phones. They're not happy with the network service and might want to move to another network because there's a better package on offer. How's that going to work? How are you going to migrate that digital identity with you? We need to be rather focusing on fraud prevention than pushing the responsibility and the onus onto the individual to prove their ID all the time. We have plenty of systems in play where retailers can get access to facial comparatives. So when you go in and you apply for an account, they can compare it to the ID photo on record versus a person standing in front of them. But then the retailers are also trying to advance, and they take credit applications via WhatsApp. If you take a credit application via WhatsApp and that application turns out to be fraudulent, what can I tell you? I mean, that's you do that eyes wide open and you accept that risk when you do it. It's not really the best of ways to take credit apps. And it's that balancing line between retail channels wanting to extend credit to those who need it and make the extension of that credit as simple as possible, but obviating good fraud prevention methodology in order to do that. You've got to strike that balance very carefully.
Well, thank you very much for your time here on All Angles and for all your expertise. That is Craig Pedersen. He's from the He is from the TFG Forensics, and basically cybercrime in South Africa is on a rise.